The day dawned gray over Zavoria. The twin suns were hidden behind thick clouds, casting the palace in dim light. Inside, tension spread like smoke. Servants whispered of rebellion. Guards tightened their watch. Everyone knew the nobles who opposed. Queen Sarilith would not stop with words. Daniel stood at the balcony of his chamber, his arm still bandaged from the night's battle. Below, the city stirred uneasily. He could see groups of citizens gathered in the streets, arguing, pointing, toward the palace. Rumors had spread quickly, of the queen's shocking confession, of the human who stood beside her, of assassins defeated in the night. A knock came at the door. Sarilith entered, wearing armor for the first time since he had met her. It was black with silver trim fitted to her frame, the crown replaced by a circlet of steel. She looked less like a monarch and more like a warrior. Her eyes held his. "It is time." Daniel turned from the balcony. "They're coming, aren't they?" "Yes," she said. "Phelan has gathered those who would see me fall. He marches even now. They will strike at the palace itself." Daniel tightened his fists. "Then we fight." Sarilith studied him, her expression unreadable. "You are only one man, Daniel of Earth, yet already you have done more than I expected. You do not have to stand in the fire again." Daniel shook his head. "When you said those words in the hall, you tied me to this. I'm not running now. If your throne falls, then so do I. If we stand together." For a heartbeat, her eyes softened. "Together," she repeated. The rebellion came at midday. The palace walls trembled as explosions shook the gates. Rebels poured through, nobles, soldiers wearing dark banners shouting for Sarilith's fall. The air filled with the clash of steel and the cries of war. In the great hall, Sarilith stood at the front with her loyal guard. Daniel stood beside her, staff in hand, his heart hammering, but his stance firm. The doors burst open. Lord Phelan strode in, clad in golden armor, his spear gleaming with crystal fire. Behind him marched lines of soldiers. His voice thundered, "Sarilith, you shame the throne. Today we cleanse our world of weakness. Today you fall, and your human pet with you." Sarilith's sword flashed as she raised it. "Today you will learn that courage cannot be silenced." The battle exploded, the hall filled with chaos. Guards clashed with rebels, steel against steel, shield against spear. Cries echoed against the crystal walls. Daniel fought with all his strength, his staff striking hard and fast, tripping foes, deflecting blades. He was not the strongest, but he was quick, and desperation gave him power. Phelan cut through soldiers like a storm, his spear blazing. At last he faced Sarilith in the center of the hall. Their weapons clashed with a sound like thunder, sword against spear, queen against traitor. Sparks lit the air as they battled fiercely, their movements sharp and deadly. Daniel tried to reach her side, but enemies blocked his path. He swung his staff, striking one across the face, kicking another back. Pain shot through his arm, but he pressed on. He had to reach her. Phelan laughed coldly as he forced Sarilith back. "You are weak. You let a human stand beside you. You disgrace the blood of your ancestors." Sarilith's eyes burned. "And yet it is that human who shows more honor than you." She struck hard, but Phelan's spear deflected and slashed across her shoulder. She stumbled, blood staining her armor. Daniel's heart clenched. Without thinking, he rushed forward. An enemy lunged at him, but he shoved his staff through the soldier's chest plate, knocking him flat. He pushed through the chaos until he stood between Sarilith and Phelan. "Out of my way, insect," Phelan roared. Daniel planted his staff firmly. His voice shook but carried across the hall. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The nobles watching gasped. Some shouted for his death. Others fell silent, stunned at his courage. Phelan sneered. "Then die." He thrust his spear. Daniel twisted, barely avoiding the killing. "Strike," his staff slamming against the shaft. The impact numbed his arms. Phelan attacked again, faster, stronger. Daniel staggered back, blocking desperately. "Daniel!" Sarilith cried, trying to rise, but her wound slowed her. The crowd roared. as the human faced the noble champion. Daniel's breath came ragged, his arms burned, but he refused to yield. Every strike he blocked, every step he held, bought Sarilith time to recover. At last, Valen thrust high. Daniel ducked low and swung his staff with all his strength against Valen's knee. The noble staggered. Daniel seized the moment, striking again at the wrist. The spear clattered from Valen's hand. The hall fell silent. Daniel stood trembling, his staff pressed against Valen's throat. His voice was raw but steady. Yield. Valen's eyes burned with hatred. He looked around, saw the nobles. Watching, saw the queen rising again, sword in hand. Slowly, his lips curled into a snarl. Never. He lunged for a hidden blade at his belt. Before he could strike, Sarilith's sword pierced his chest. His eyes widened. The hall rang with silence as he fell to the ground, lifeless. The battle stilled. The rebels faltered, seeing their leader dead. Guards pressed forward, forcing them back. Some threw down weapons, others fled. Within minutes, the rebellion crumbled. The hall was filled with silence, broken only by the moans of the wounded. Sarilith stood tall, her sword still gleaming, her wound bleeding but her eyes fierce. Daniel stood beside her, his staff splintered, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. The nobles who had remained neutral now knelt slowly, one by one. The queen had not fallen. The human had not broken. Together they had stood against the storm. Sarilith raised her voice, strong and clear. You doubted me. You doubted him. You doubted that courage could come from beyond our blood. But today, you have seen the truth. This human stood when others fled. He bled when others betrayed. And I will not deny what I spoke in my hall. My words were not madness. They were truth. She turned, her eyes on Daniel. I wish you were my husband, human, not to shield me, not as strategy. But because in you I have found the strength my world has forgotten. Gasps spread again, but this time they carried awe, not outrage. The nobles lowered their heads. Daniel's chest tightened. He had no throne, no crown, no army. But he had stood, and she had chosen him. He bowed his head slightly. Then let us build that strength together. The hall erupted, not in rebellion this time, but in reluctant respect. The nobles did not cheer, but they did not oppose. They had seen what could not be denied. That night, as the fires of battle died and the wounded were tended, Daniel stood, once more on the balcony, looking out at the city. The clouds had broken and the twin suns shone again, their light spilling across the towers. Sarilith joined him, her arm now bandaged, her crown returned. For a long moment they stood in silence. You changed them, she said softly. Daniel shook his head. We changed them. Together. She looked at him, her eyes softer than he had ever seen. This is only the beginning. There will be more battles, more trials. They will not accept easily. Daniel smiled faintly. Then we'll face them together. For the first time, the queen's lips curved into a true smile. Together, she whispered. The hall that once gasped in outrage now whispered of a new era. And as dawn spread across Zavoria, two worlds, one alien, one human, took their first step into a future bound not by fear, but by courage, trust, and something deeper, a bond that had begun with a shocking confession and ended with the birth of hope. The night after the queen's shocking words felt like a storm pressed against the palace walls. Daniel could hardly sleep in the chamber they had given him. The bed was soft, the walls smooth crystal, but the silence outside was heavy with danger. He knew every noble in that hall now saw him as a threat. He sat by the window watching the alien city spread out below. The towers glowed faintly, their tips piercing the mist, and far in the distance the great rings of Zavoria cut across the sky like silver scars. It should have been beautiful, but all Daniel felt was unease. Why had Queen Sarilith said that? I wish you were my husband, human. Those words echoed in his mind again and again. They had not sounded like a joke. She had spoken them with the same steady voice she used to command her nobles. Yet what could she possibly gain by tying herself, even in words, to a human envoy? A soft chime at the door broke his thoughts. He turned quickly. 2 guards entered, their armor gleaming darkly. "The Queen summons you," one said in a flat tone. Daniel's throat tightened. Was this the end? An execution dressed as hospitality? He stood slowly, nodding. "Lead the way." The guards escorted him through corridors lit by thin beams of pale light. Statues of past rulers lined the hall, each carved in sharp, alien beauty. Their eyes seemed to follow him. At last they stopped before a tall door inlaid with sapphire patterns. The guards opened it and Daniel stepped inside. The chamber was smaller than the throne hall, but grand in its own way. A long table ran down the center, maps and scrolls scattered across it. At the far end stood Queen Sarilith. She had changed from her crown and gown into lighter attire, a deep blue robe tied with silver thread, her hair unbound and flowing. She looked less like a monarch and more like a woman deep in thought. "Leave us," she said to the guards without turning. They obeyed instantly, closing the door behind them. Silence filled the room. Daniel cleared his throat. "You asked for me, Your Majesty?" Sarilith turned to him, her eyes unreadable. "Sit," he obeyed, settling into one of the carved chairs. His heart hammered. She remained standing, studying him as if he were a puzzle. Finally she spoke. "You are wondering why I said those words." Daniel gave a small, nervous laugh. "It has crossed my mind." For the first time, a hint of something softened her. Expression. Not quite humor, not quite sorrow. "If I had not said them, you would already be dead." Daniel blinked. "Dead?" "The noble who insulted you, Lord Valen, he had allies ready to strike. He wished to prove you unworthy by your blood spilled in my hall. My declaration stopped them. No one dares move against one I have claimed, even with words only." Daniel leaned back slowly. So it had been a strategy. A move to protect him, or to protect herself. "You saved me. By pretending to claim me as your husband?" "Pretend or not," Sarilith said sharply. "The words carry power. They forced silence where blades were ready. My council despises you, Daniel of Earth, but they will not openly defy me. Not yet." Daniel rubbed his hands together. "Not yet" doesn't sound very comforting. She tilted her head slightly. "You speak with honesty, and that is rare here. Tell me, do you hate me for placing you in such a storm?" Daniel hesitated. Hate? No. Confusion? Yes. Fear, of course. But there was something else too. Something he couldn't explain. "I don't hate you, but I don't understand you." Sarilith stepped closer, her robe whispering across the stone. "Understand this, human. My throne is surrounded by wolves. They seek any weakness. When I declared those words, I gave them something they could not use against me without revealing their hunger too soon. Yet..." She paused, her voice dropping. There was more than strategy. Daniel looked up, startled. Her eyes were on him, steady, but behind them flickered something almost human. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. But before she could answer, the chamber doors slammed open. A group of nobles swept in, their cloaks bright with rank, their faces hard. Lord Valen was at the front, his golden embroidery blazing under the light. "My queen," Valen said smoothly, though his tone dripped venom. "We demand an audience. Tonight. Now." Sarilith's face returned to cold stone. "You dare storm into my chamber uninvited?" "The court whispers of your unconfession," Valen said. "The people murmur. Already some believe you have broken faith with your bloodline. Explain yourself before your throne crumbles." Daniel felt their eyes stab into him like knives. He forced himself to sit still, though his heart raced. Sarilith moved slowly around the table until she stood between Daniel and the nobles, a shield of dignity. "You presume much, Lord Valen. I need explain nothing to you." Valen sneered. A queen who would bind herself to an insect owes her people an explanation. Daniel's fists clenched. He wanted to stand, to argue, but Sarilith's slight shake of the head held him back. "You speak boldly," she said. Perhaps too boldly. Another noble stepped forward, a woman with silver markings across her brow. "Your Majesty, forgive us, but the council will not remain silent. Tomorrow at dawn a gathering will be held. If you wish to defend your words, you must do so before all of us. If you do not, others may claim your seat." Daniel's stomach dropped. This was worse than he imagined. Sarilith inclined her head slightly. "So be it. I will stand before the council at dawn." The nobles left with sharp steps, leaving the chamber heavy with their shadow. Daniel finally let out the breath he'd been holding. "They mean to take your throne. They will try," Sarilith said calmly. "You saved me earlier. But how? Do we survive this?" Her eyes turned back to him, fierce and bright. "By standing together. Tomorrow you will sit at my side. Do not falter. Do not show fear. If they see weakness, we are both finished." Daniel swallowed. "You want me to play along, as if your words were real?" "Not as if," Sarilith said quietly. "For the court, it must be real." Daniel's heart skipped. He looked at her, trying to read her meaning, but her face gave nothing away. Later that night, alone again, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. He had come here for peace talks, to speak carefully, to avoid offense. Now he was about to be paraded as the queen's chosen partner before nobles who wanted his head. Was this survival or suicide? And yet, when he remembered her eyes, that brief flicker of honesty when she said there was more than strategy, he wondered, could there really be truth behind her impossible words? Sleep never came. The palace echoed with whispers, footsteps, distant voices. Somewhere beyond the walls a rebellion of words was already forming. At dawn he would walk into the fire. The council hall of Zavoria was even larger than the royal throne room Daniel had first entered. It was shaped like a vast circle, its walls lined with glowing sigils, and its roof supported by towering crystal columns. Dozens of nobles filled the seats that rose in tiers all around. Their cloaks shimmered with colors of rank, gold, red, and violet, like a sea of judgment. At the center stood a raised platform, 2 chairs carved from black stone, one for the queen, one, now, for him. Daniel's throat felt dry as he followed Sarilith into the hall. Her steps were graceful, her chin high, every movement screaming command. She wore a flowing silver gown embroidered with blue threads, her crown back upon her head, her hair braided like dark rivers. Even in the face of hostility, she looked unshakable. Daniel tried to match her calm, but his palms sweated. Every noble's eyes burned into him. Whispers spread like fire. Why is the human here? Has the queen lost her mind? He should be on his knees, not beside her. The herald's voice boomed. All rise for Her Majesty Sarilith, sovereign of Zavoria, keeper of the sapphire throne. The nobles rose. Their movements were sharp, not respectful, but forced. When the queen sat, Daniel took his seat beside her. The weight of it nearly crushed him. Lord Valan stood immediately, his cloak heavy with gold, his sharp face twisted in contempt. "Your Majesty, you called this gathering. Then explain to us, before your people and your ancestors, why you spoke. Such blasphemy yesterday. Why did you declare before all that you wished this insect?" He pointed at Daniel. "As your husband?" Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber again. All eyes turned to Sarilith. The queen did not flinch. "Because he has shown courage when many of you have not," she said calmly. "Because he spoke truth to power without trembling. And because his kind may hold strength you have forgotten." The nobles erupted in protest. One slammed his staff against the ground. Another shouted, "Strength! They are frail. Their ships are weak, their weapons outdated. They are nothing but beggars of the stars." Daniel's hands clenched on his knees. He wanted to answer. But this was her fight. Or was it also his? Saralith raised her hand. Silence fell. Her eyes swept across the room. If you doubt his worth, test him. If you doubt my choice, let him prove it. Daniel's stomach dropped. Test me? Lord Valan smiled coldly. Gladly. Let the human face a trial of honor. If he fails, he proves himself unworthy, and your words collapse like dust. If he succeeds, he sneered. If he survives, we will listen. The council murmured in agreement. Some looked eager, others worried, but none opposed. Saralith's jaw tightened. She turned to Daniel, her eyes meeting his. You do not have to accept, she whispered low enough only for him to hear. Daniel swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse. He was a diplomat, not a warrior, but he remembered her words the night before. Stand with me. Do not falter. Do not show fear. If he refused, they would call him coward. If he agreed and lost, he might die. He stood slowly, turning to face the council. His voice was steady, though inside he trembled. I accept your trial. The hall roared with excitement. The nobles leaned forward, their eyes gleaming. The trial arena lay beneath the council hall, a wide circle of stone, surrounded by tall pillars, open to the watching crowd above. Daniel stepped onto the sand, his boots crunching softly. Across from him stood a Zavorian warrior chosen as his opponent. The warrior was massive, armorless but muscled like a beast, his skin etched with glowing tribal marks. He carried a long spear tipped with crystal. His eyes burned with confidence. Daniel was given only a staff of plain wood. He tested its weight nervously. The herald called out, Trial of honor. Daniel of Earth against Valar the Spear. The warrior slammed his spear against the ground, roaring. The crowd answered with thunderous cheers. Daniel's chest tightened. He remembered his training back on Earth. Self-defense classes, hours of practice in negotiation, not combat. But he also remembered something his old instructor had told him. Victory isn't always about strength. It's about using what you have when the moment comes. The gong rang. Valar charged. His spear shot forward like lightning. Daniel barely twisted aside, the crystal tip slicing past his arm. He stumbled but held his staff ready. The crowd jeered. Too slow. He'll die in moments. Valar swung again, his spear sweeping low. Daniel jumped back, sand spraying. He gripped the staff tighter, waiting. Saralith watched from above, her face calm but her eyes sharp. Valar thrust once more. Daniel twisted, slamming his staff against the shaft of the spear. The shock numbed his hands, but the weapon deflected. He saw an opening and swung at Valar's side. The blow landed, but the warrior barely flinched. The alien laughed. Weak. Daniel's lungs burned, but he forced himself to think. If he fought strength against strength, he would lose. He needed to use speed, angles, timing. The next time, Valar lunged. Daniel sidestepped and jabbed his staff at the warrior's knee. The strike made Valar stumble. The crowd gasped. Daniel pressed, striking again at joints, at weak spots, never directly. Each hit chipped away at the warrior's confidence. At last, Valar roared in frustration, lifting his spear high for a killing blow. Daniel ducked low, sweeping his staff against the warrior's legs with all his strength. Valar crashed to the ground, his spear clattering. Daniel planted his staff at the warrior's throat. The crowd fell silent. Yield, Daniel said, his voice shaking but firm. Valar's eyes blazed, but slowly. He raised his hand in surrender. The hall above erupted, not with laughter this time, but with stunned cries. Some shouted in anger, others in disbelief. Daniel stepped back, gasping for air. His body ached, but he was alive. He had won. Later, in the quiet of the Queen's private chamber, Daniel sat exhausted. Saralith entered, her eyes brighter than before. You surprise them, she said. I surprise myself, Daniel admitted, rubbing his sore arms. You fought with more than strength. You fought with mind. That is what they cannot see. Daniel looked at her. Was that enough? Will they accept your words now? Some will, she said. Others will plot harder than before. But you have bought us time. Silence stretched. Then Daniel said softly, You risked everything by putting me there. I risked nothing I was not willing to lose, Saralith replied. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. And you proved me right. Their eyes met. For a moment, the weight of politics faded. He saw not a queen, but a woman, burdened and brave. She saw not a human envoy, but someone who had chosen to stand beside her when it mattered most. Daniel's heart raced. He remembered again her words in the hall. I wish you were my husband, human. Were they still just strategy, or was something real growing between them? Before he could ask, a guard rushed in, bowing. My queen, a message. Rebels plot to strike, tonight. They say if the human falls, your throne falls with him. The fragile quiet shattered. Daniel felt his chest tighten. The trial had proven his worth, but it had also painted a target on his back. Saralith's voice was steel again. Let them come. They will learn that threats only make us stronger. She turned to Daniel, her eyes fierce. Stay close. From this moment on, your survival is not just your own, it is tied to mine. Daniel nodded slowly. He had entered this world as a negotiator. Now he stood as something else, though he did not yet know what. But he knew one thing clearly. Whatever storm came, he could not turn away. The palace at night felt different from the day. By sunlight it had seemed cold and regal, a place of sharp power. But under moonlight, the crystal towers glowed faintly, and shadows stretched long in the corridors. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional step of guards or the whisper of the wind through high windows. Daniel could not sleep. The warning of a planned attack echoed in his mind. Every creak of stone, every flicker of light made him tense. He sat near the door of his chamber, a wooden staff resting across his knees. He knew it was a poor weapon against skilled assassins, but he would not be caught unprepared. He thought of Earth, of his family, of the life he had left behind. He had come as a negotiator, never imagining he would be forced to fight for survival in a foreign court. And yet, despite the fear, a strange determination burned in him. He had seen the Queen's courage, her willingness to stand against her own counsel. If she would not bow, neither would he. A soft knock broke his thoughts. His hand gripped the staff tightly. Who is it? He called. The door opened and Queen Saralith stepped inside. She wore a plain dark cloak, her crown absent, her hair unbound. Without the symbols of rule, she looked almost like another person, yet her presence still filled the room. You should rest, she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. Rest isn't easy when half the court wants me dead. Her lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, more like a weary acknowledgement of truth. She moved closer, her eyes sharp. They will try tonight. My scouts have heard whispers in the lower halls. Blades have been brought in secret. You cannot remain here. Then where do we go? Daniel asked. Her gaze held his. With me. They moved through the dim corridors, guided by Saralith herself. She carried no weapon but walked with the calm of someone who trusted her own will more than any blade. Daniel followed close, his staff gripped tight, his ears straining for the sound of pursuit. At last they entered a hidden chamber behind the throne room. The walls were carved with ancient runes glowing faintly like stars. In the center stood a long table of crystal, maps spread across it. This was my ancestors' war chamber, Saralith explained. Few know it still exists. Here we can plan. Here we can wait. Daniel looked at her, his voice low. Why risk yourself for me? You could have left me guarded in my room. Her eyes lingered on him. Because if you fall, everything I declared falls with you. And she hesitated. Because I do not wish to see you fall. The words struck him harder than he expected. Before he could reply, the sound of boots echoed down the hidden corridor. Sarilith's expression hardened. "They've found us." The doors burst open. Figures in dark armor swept in. Assassins sent by the rebel nobles. Their faces were hidden behind masks, their blades curved and gleaming. Daniel's heart pounded. He raised his staff, forcing himself not to tremble. Sarilith stepped forward, her cloak falling back to reveal a short sword at her side. She drew it in one fluid motion, the blade singing. The assassins advanced. The first lunged at Daniel. He barely managed to block, the clash of wood against metal jolting through his arms. He twisted and swung low, striking the attacker's leg, enough to make him stumble. Another came at him from the side, but Sarilith was faster. Her sword flashed, deflecting the strike. "Stay close to me," she ordered. They fought back to back, Daniel using his staff to block and trip, Sarilith striking with precise, lethal grace. She moved like a storm contained in human form, her blade never wasting a motion. Daniel, though clumsy compared to her, fought with desperation, every strike powered by the will to survive. The chamber rang with the clash of steel and the cries of combat. One assassin leapt from a pillar, blade aimed at Sarilith's heart. Without thinking, Daniel threw himself between them. The blade cut across his arm, pain searing, but he shoved his staff forward, knocking the assassin back. Sarilith turned sharply, her eyes wide. For a heartbeat, she looked not like a queen, but like a woman struck by fear. Then her sword cut down, the assassin in a single stroke. Blood roared in Daniel's ears, but he stood firm, ignoring the pain. "I'm fine," he gasped. "You are reckless," she snapped, yet her voice trembled. At last, the remaining assassins faltered, retreating toward the door. Sarilith stepped forward, her sword raised. "Tell your masters," she said coldly, "that every trap only sharpens our resolve." The assassins fled into the shadows. Silence returned, heavy and sharp. Daniel leaned against the table, clutching his wounded arm. Sarilith sheathed her sword and moved to his side. She tore a strip of cloth from her cloak and bound the cut with surprising gentleness. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "If I hadn't, you'd be—" Daniel began. Her eyes met his, fierce and shining. "I am queen. I must be willing to face death. You are not bound to me." Daniel swallowed. "Aren't I? You made me part of this when you said those words. You tied my fate to yours. If you fall, I fall. If you stand, I stand. Isn't that what it means?" Sarilith froze, her hand stilling on the bandage. For a moment, all the walls of royal pride seemed to lower. Her voice softened. "Yes, that is what it means." They stood in silence, close enough to hear each other's breath. The weight of politics, of survival, pressed around them. Yet beneath it, something else stirred, something fragile, something dangerous. Finally, Sarilith pulled back, her mask of command returning. "We cannot linger. The council will demand answers tomorrow. Tonight they tried blades. Tomorrow they will try words sharper than steel." Daniel nodded, though his arm throbbed. "Then we'll face them together." Next morning, the council hall was filled once again. Nobles whispered furiously, their voices dripping with venom. Rumors of the failed assassination had already spread. Sarilith entered with Daniel at her side. Her gown today was black, embroidered with silver thorns. Her crown gleamed like fire. She radiated strength. Lord Valen rose immediately. His voice thundered. "You see, Council? This human is poison. His presence brings blades into our sacred halls. Last night assassins struck, and yet the Queen continues to protect him, as though his life matters more than ours." Murmurs of agreement swept the chamber. Sarilith's voice cut through them. "Those assassins came not for him but for me. They struck because I dared to speak truth. They struck because they feared change, and he, this human, stood against them. He bled for me when others would have fled." Gasps rippled through the nobles. Daniel stood tall, though his arm was bound. He met their eyes, letting them see his resolve. "I am not here to steal your throne. I am here because your queen spoke words that tied our fates. If you believe I am unworthy, then challenge me openly, not with blades in the dark." The council stirred. Some frowned, others whispered. A few even nodded grudgingly. Lord Valen's face twisted with fury. "Your Majesty, you disgrace us. You would choose a weakling over your own bloodlines?" Saralith's eyes burned like fire. "I would choose courage over cowardice. I would choose truth over tradition. And if that truth means standing with a human, then so be it." The hall fell into stunned silence. For the first time, Daniel realized that her words were no longer just a shield. She was not only protecting him, she was declaring something real, and every noble knew it. The shuttle landed with a low hiss, steam rising from the hot stone of the alien landing pad. Daniel stood at the edge of the ramp, his hands tight against his sides, his heart thudding louder than the engines. He had been trained as a diplomat, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. He was about to walk into the royal hall of Queen Saralith, ruler of Zavoria, a world that had once sworn never to allow humans to set foot on its soil. Daniel knew the history. For decades, Zavoria and Earth had traded accusations, mistrust, and small border conflicts. Peace had been fragile enough that a single insult could break it forever. Daniel had been chosen not for his skill with weapons, but for his calm manner, his patience, and his strange ability to speak the alien language with near-perfect tone. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he was walking into the den of a predator. The guards waited at the bottom of the ramp. They were tall, their armor black and silver, their eyes glowing faintly with inner fire. Daniel forced himself to walk down, his boots clicking on the stone. The guards did not greet him. They simply turned and led him forward through high corridors lined with banners. The banners showed scenes of Zavorian victories, warriors standing over defeated foes, ships burning in space, alien generals lifting swords in triumph. Every banner reminded Daniel that he was walking among people who had once sworn that humans were weak, unworthy, barely worth existing. At last the doors opened into the great hall. Daniel stopped without meaning to. The chamber was massive, its ceiling lost in shadows, lit only by pillars of blue light rising from the floor. The floor itself was polished obsidian, so smooth that it reflected the nobles who lined the edges of the room. Each noble wore a cloak of rank, red, gold, or deep violet, embroidered with silver runes. Their faces were sharp, eyes piercing, and their expressions were carved with contempt as soon as they saw him. And there she was, Queen Saralith. She sat upon a throne carved from living crystal, her posture straight, her eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and command. She was tall, her skin pale like moonlight, her hair falling like black silk over her shoulders. A crown of silver and sapphire rested upon her head, and when she raised one hand slightly, the entire room fell silent. Daniel walked forward, each step echoing. He kept his eyes steady, refusing to show fear even though his throat felt dry. He had been told to bow, but he remembered his training. Bowing too low might be seen as weakness, bowing too little as arrogance. He inclined his head just enough to show respect without surrender. "Human," Saralith said, her voice clear and cold, yet not cruel. "You stand in my hall, though your people once promised me never to return. Why have you come?" Daniel took a slow breath. He had prepared his speech for weeks, but now, facing her and the sea of hostile eyes, he spoke not from his notes, but from his heart. "I come because peace is worth more than pride," Daniel said. "Our worlds have bled enough. You call us weak. Perhaps we are weaker than you in strength of arm, but weakness does not mean worthlessness. We seek friendship, not conquest." A ripple of disdain swept through the nobles. One tall lord stepped forward, his cloak heavy with golden embroidery. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Friendship?" The noble spat. "You dare speak of friendship when your kind crawled into space on machines you barely understood? When your fleets crumbled at the first sight of war? You are insects, and yet you walk in our sacred hall as if you belong." Daniel turned to him, meeting his eyes. His hands trembled slightly, but he did not let the noble see. "If we are insects, then remember, sometimes it is the smallest creatures that endure storms the longest." Daniel said quietly. A murmur rose. Some laughed bitterly, others hissed. The noble's face twisted in anger. He pointed at Daniel. See how they mock us, weak tongues and arrogant hearts. He should not even stand here, my queen. Remove him before his stench poisons the air. Daniel braced himself for guards to seize him. He had expected insults, humiliation. He had prepared to endure it. What he had not expected was what happened next. Queen Serelith rose slowly from her throne. The hall stilled. Every noble's eyes turned to her, waiting for the cold verdict, the dismissal, perhaps even the execution order. She stepped down from the throne, each movement deliberate, her long gown whispering across the stone. She stopped only a few feet from Daniel, her eyes never leaving his. Daniel felt the weight of her gaze. He thought she would strike him with words sharper than blades. Instead, her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something unreadable. I have heard enough, she said. The hall was silent. And then, in a voice that carried like thunder through the crystal chamber, she said the words that shattered the air, words that would be whispered across the galaxy for years to come. I wish you were my husband, human. For a heartbeat, silence. Then chaos. Nobles gasped, shouted, cursed. Cloaks rustled as they stepped back in shock. The golden-cloaked lord nearly stumbled, his mouth open in disbelief. The air itself seemed to shake with outrage. Daniel stood frozen. His mind reeled. Had he misheard? Was this some kind of trap? His face flushed with heat. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The queen's eyes never wavered. She stood as calm as a mountain, letting the storm crash around her. The nobles cried out in fury. This is treason! She disgraces the throne. Humans are filth. How can she speak such madness? The guards shifted uneasily, unsure whether to seize Daniel or protect him. Daniel's heart pounded. He could barely breathe. Why had she said that? Was it some cruel jest, a weapon meant to humiliate him? Or was it something else, something far more dangerous? Serelith raised her hand, and the noise fell silent at once. Her voice was like steel, wrapped in silk. You call him weak. You call him insect. Yet in a single breath he has shown more courage than many of you who hide behind titles and bloodlines. Do not speak to me of disgrace. I will speak as I choose. Daniel felt every eye on him. His life had changed in a single sentence, though he did not yet know whether it was for salvation or doom. The queen turned back to her throne, leaving him standing in the center of a storm he could not escape. And so the first day of peace talks ended not with treaties but with a confession that shook a world.